I want to start by saying what should be plainly clear. It did not have to be this way. In the 1980s, scientists from NASA modeled out how quickly the Earth was warming. And armed with those models, they warned Congress of a looming crisis. They pleaded that steps would be taken to shift course immediately and avert disaster. But at the very same time, Exxon, the world's largest oil company, also had scientists who they paid to build similar models. Those scientists came to the same conclusion as their colleagues at NASA, but their findings led the company to do two things. First, they raised the decks of their offshore platforms, quietly safeguarding a billion-dollar infrastructure of projects from rising sea levels, warming temperatures, and increasing storm severity, all of which were indicated by the climate science. Second, in the words of Bill McKibben in his new book, Falter, it began spending money to build an architecture of deceit, denial, and disinformation that for the next 30 years kept us locked in a pointless debate about whether global warming was real. A question that, remember, both sides knew the answer to from the get-go. This, in the words of Bill McKibben, turned out to be the most consequential lie in human history. So here we are, nearly 40 years later. Hurricane Dorian ravaged the Bahamas a few weeks ago, nearly flattening the Abaco Islands. Dozens of people were killed, and those who survived lost everything. In Brazil this summer, there were more than 80,000 fires burning across the Amazon, which we know produces 20% of the planet's oxygen. Even as scientists warn that the future of human civilization depends on the integrity of the Amazon, Brazil's foreign minister declares there is no climate catastrophe. Climate denial now is apparently one of America's chief exports. We are running out of food. Extreme weather events are already contributing to a dramatic decline of essential nutrients in the world's staple foods. Climate scientists predict that by the year 2050, we will likely see dangerous protein, zinc, and iron and vitamin deficiencies, which will threaten the health of much of the human population around the planet. In the next 30 years, there may be up to 1 billion climate refugees. 1 billion. People forced from their homes because of catastrophic extreme weather conditions, food shortages, and the wars and the violence that they will inevitably provoke. In the first half of this year alone, there were more than 7 million climate refugees around the world. We're finally connecting the dots now between the growing intensity of hurricanes every summer and the warming of our oceans. New Yorkers are preparing for the possibility of massive storm surges flooding lower Manhattan, as foreshadowed by Hurricane Sandy. And barring dramatic intervention, we now know that New Orleans, Houston, Miami, and other American cities are at risk of frequent, massive flooding, as scientists predict the possibility of 6-foot sea level rise by century's end. We have witnessed our own precious California burning, and we hear dire warnings of future and even longer enduring droughts. Predictions indicate that our state will see both floods and critical water shortages in the coming years. We've all now heard that we have less than 10 years to take strong actions, including making huge strides to transition off of fossil fuels in order to avert the most catastrophic effects of climate change. If we hit that 2 degrees Celsius warming, we dramatically increase the likelihood of irreversibly changing the quality of life on this planet. We have spent the past several decades careening toward catastrophe, desecrating our most precious and sacred inheritance, and laying the foundation for a world of suffering for our children and for theirs. Hayom Harat Olam. Today is the birthday of the world, Rosh Hashanah. We have to talk today about the earth. We have to celebrate, and we have to stand in judgment and determine what we, each and every one of us, is going to do about it. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. When God began to create the earth was unformed and void, tohu vavohu, with darkness hovering over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. All of existence was a dark, chaotic void until God created order, light, earth and sea, rich and varied vegetation, diverse species of plants and trees and animals, stretching from the highest mountaintops to the depths of the seas, waterfalls and sand dunes, majestic seaside cliffs and sacred valleys, dense jungles and forests filled with all kinds of life. And then human beings, the pinnacle of creation, made in God's own image and placed right in the heart of it all in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, told not just to enjoy and reap the benefits of nature, but la'ovda u'l'shomra, to care for it, to serve it, and to protect it. Of course, it took only 10 generations for human beings to destroy all of that beauty. Their violence and their cruelty was more than God could bear. The Torah says that the Lord saw a great human wickedness on the earth, how they thought only of evil all the time. And the Lord regretted making human beings and was deeply distressed. The Lord said, I will blot out from the earth the people I have created, but not just people and animals, creeping things, birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. It was a great extinction, and all the flesh that stirred on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts, and all the things that swarmed upon the earth, and all humankind. But when that flood subsided, when Noah and his family emerged from the ark, God had a new regret, destroying the world. And the Lord said, never again will I doom the earth. Never again will I destroy every living being as I have done. And in that fateful moment, the earth was entrusted not to an impulsive and punitive God, but instead to an insatiable, rapacious, and impetuous human community. God will never again destroy the earth, but if we are not careful, we very well may. When Dr. King prepared to launch the Poor People's Campaign in 1968, he spoke of three major evils plaguing the country: the evil of racism, the evil of poverty, and the evil of war. Somehow these three evils are tied together, he said. Wouldn't it be absurd to talk about integrating schools without being concerned about the survival of a world in which to be integrated? When Bishop Barber relaunched Dr. King's movement last year, with many of us present in solidarity, he added to Dr. King's three evils the threat of ecological devastation. Why? Because it is impossible today to address racism and poverty and the false moral narrative that upholds them without also addressing the greatest, most widespread, and most existential of the challenges that this human community faces: environmental devastation. And the inverse is, of course, also true. It is willfully ignorant to talk about environmental devastation without recognizing the disproportionate toll that it takes on poor people and people of color. We know that those who are socially and economically vulnerable to begin with already suffer far greater consequences from extreme weather events. We need to talk today. We need to talk about the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, and now in Newark and in other cities, about how lead poisoning is far more likely to affect children of color, about how, because of a history of racism and economic inequality in this country, Black communities are much more likely than white communities to live next door to coal plants, to landfills, to hazardous waste sites, which results in a far greater likelihood of asthma and heart attacks and lung disease and even premature death. We need to talk today about how oil drilling and refining happening literally next door to residential homes right here in LA County, in Wilmington and Carson, is affecting people's lives every day. We have to talk about how freight movement to and from our ports is doing real damage to Black and Latino communities. Sidle up to Sean Hecht, professor of environmental policy from UCLA, over Shabbos lunch one day, and he will tell you about the devastating effects of lead poisoning on families in these neighborhoods. Or talk to my sister, Brous, a frontline community organizer, and she will tell you about how environmental racism affects food access in the Black and brown communities that she is working with in Skid Row. Dr. King did not speak directly of the environmental crisis. The science emerged in the decades that followed his death. But he did plant the seed for the climate justice movement when he preached again and again that all life is interrelated. You know these words. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. We are made to live together because of the interrelated structure of reality. Today, Raoni Metuktire, chief of the indigenous Brazilian Kayapo people, offers the same message. We all breathe this one air. We all drink the same water. We live on this one planet. We need to protect the earth. If only we listened. In Vayikra Rabbah, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai brings a teaching that you may have heard before. A group of travelers, he said, is out on a ship at sea when one of them inexplicably takes out a drill and begins boring a hole beneath his seat. All the other travelers are stunned. What do you think you're doing, they say. He says, I'm just drilling under my own seat. What difference does it make to you? And they say to him, don't you understand? When the water comes in, it will flood this ship for all of us. You are not just drowning yourself, you're drowning me too. Your toxic waste pollutes my water and sickens my soil. Your oil refinery that produces gasoline powering your car shortens the lives of Latino residents of Wilmington. Your freight emissions from transport of overseas goods to Amazon delivery is causing asthma for the residents of Boyle Heights. It's all connected. We are all connected. In Honduras, the farmers who have lived off the land for generations now are facing crisis as that land has turned arid and fallow from declining rainfall and rising temperatures. Of course, the cruel irony here is that the nations and the communities that are already hardest hit by climate change are those that have contributed the least to global carbon emissions. Meanwhile, the United States is both the wealthiest nation and the single greatest overall contributor of harmful emissions, and is now hell-bent on closing its doors to refugees and asylum seekers alike. For better and for worse, we do not stand separate and apart from the rest of humanity. I very rarely find myself wishing that we could time travel back to the 80s. The hair was big. The metal was heavy, and all of the phones were attached to the walls. But in this one way, I do wish that we could go back. In the late 70s and in the 80s, humankind stood at a crossroads. Armed with scientific evidence, we could have made a different choice. But corporate greed and craven politicians made the choice for us. And with contemptuous lies, they sold our future for unprecedented financial gain. So what are we supposed to do now? Elon Musk envisions colonizing Mars. The rest of us simply don't have the luxury of escaping this planet, so rife with pain and so full of beauty. Torah calls us both to imagine and to fight to manifest in this world the ideal. God created the earth for human beings to enjoy, to protect, and to defend. But over the course of time, we forgot what it means to hold this sacred inheritance. And instead, we burned and we polluted and we destroyed. The only choice that we have now is to radically recalibrate. We recognize that lechatchila, from the outset, we could and should and would have developed a deeper awareness of the preciousness and the precariousness of the earth. We should have seen trees as the life-sustaining miracles that they are. We should have protected our biodiversity. We should have invested in renewable energies. We should have been responsible stewards of all that we had been entrusted. We should have recognized the fragile interconnectedness between all people and all beings, which Dr. King and Metuktire and the rabbis in Vayikra Rabbah all tried to awaken us to. But Big Prophet overwhelmed the voices of the prophets, ancient and contemporary, all of whom tried to warn us of this looming devastation. And even still, we do not give up. Climate adaptation, the work to reduce social and economic vulnerability and increase resilience to a range of future possibilities, is now being actively pursued around the world. And at the same time, we know that it would be madness to give up on mitigation strategies, like the fight to reduce damaging emissions, and to try to slow the rise in temperatures. As Professor Hecht puts it, we need to help all people and communities become more resilient, even as we fight like hell to minimize the changes that people need to be resilient to. Anything short of that, and we may as well all pull out our own drills and bore holes beneath our seats right now. Why not? The ship is sinking anyway. Sadly, we are not going to be leaving our children the world that we could have, lechatchila. But when we don't achieve the ideal, we do not give up and give in. We shift instead to a b'diavad reality. We do the very best we can, given our now limited options. The rabbis in the Talmud and Brachot tell a story. Moses and God are wrapped in an intimate embrace up on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, when the people despair of Moses returning, and they build themselves a new god, a calf made of gold. They sing and they dance around it, and they say these fateful words, "This is your God, O Israel, that lifted you up out of Egypt." It's a terrible betrayal. Moses is devastated. He's physically flattened by the shock of what he sees. But God is burning with anger. God wants revenge. Va'ata hanichali, God shouts to Moses, "Now leave me alone. Go away so that I can destroy this people. I'll make you a new nation. I want to start from scratch." That should be the end of the conversation, right? But Moses, who's despondent and dismayed, flat on the ground, has an epiphany. If I have to leave before God can destroy the people, maybe I'm not as powerless as I feel. Moses says to himself, "Davar zeh talui bi." It must be that this matter depends on me. And immediately in that moment, he recovers his strength. He stands up and he grabs the Holy One. Rabbi Abahu says, just like a person might grab onto a friend by the back of his shirt. And Moses says, "Master of the universe, I will not leave until you forgive these people. You love them. Remember, that's why you brought them out of Egypt. You must not harm them." It's an act of incredible, almost unspeakable chutzpah. And unbelievable as it may be, God relents. Moses says to himself, "Davar zeh talui bi." It must be that this matter depends on me. I am asking us today to do something counterinstinctual. I'm asking us to consider, what would we do if we really believed that it mattered? If you and I believed that we could, through our actions, materially limit the destruction that we are barreling toward today, what then would we do? We would do every little thing and every big thing we possibly could. You know who's got real clarity on this right now? Our kids. 4 million of them skipped school last week in order to tell us that they are not going to stand for the reality that we have left for them. They are furious, and they're right. If you were smarter, we'd be in school, said the sign of one teenager at the climate strike in LA last week, who was standing right beside a friend whose sign read, "The earth is hotter than my imaginary boyfriend." This is a teen-led revolution. One 9-year-old boy took the mic, and he said the following: "Sometimes I wish I didn't know so much. Sometimes I wish I could sit inside a giant mansion and eat Oreos all day and not think about all the palm oil it took to make them." But he does know what he knows, and that has changed him, and it ought to change us too. The crisis is here. Our kids are telling us that this is 0 hour to act on climate change. The least that we can do is join their call. Yeah, some students in my kids' class say that the science is inconclusive. But let me be clear, the science is indisputable, as we in this room all know. And we are obligated, as citizens of the world, to protect the world. We need policies that will end the burning of fossil fuels for energy. Corporations and industries need to be held responsible for climate-destroying emissions, and they need to be held accountable. They need to help pay for some of the damage that they have caused. We need to make bold and robust change while giving displaced workers and poor people who can't afford electric and solar opportunities to work in a new green economy. We have to support candidates for office, both locally and nationally, who understand this crisis. I can't believe I even have to say these words, but it is a moral imperative that we do whatever we can to ensure a responsible, forward-thinking, science-believing government. To achieve that, we need to prioritize massive voter engagement efforts in the coming year. And we have to fight with all we've got against voter suppression, the cynical and immoral strategy to maintain power against the will of the majority by marginalizing Black and brown voices in our democracy. Yes, we need deep, systemic, structural change. We have to do whatever we can to elect government officials who take the climate science as seriously as our 9-year-olds do. But we need not only policy change, friends. We have to be part of a culture shift, a shift in consciousness. Here at ICAR, we are working to build new spiritual and social norms. We are building islands of spiritual resistance where we live in accordance with our own values, which reverberate out and hopefully inspire broader change. I'm asking you this year to join me in ICAR's Eco Challenge. Our team, led by Brooke Wirtschafter and Ingrid Steinberg, by Elisa and Peter, by rabbis and activists and organizers and professors, has created a series of actions for us to take on this year. Our goal is to shift one habit at a time. So month by month, we are asking our community to challenge ourselves with behavior changes in areas that will have the greatest potential impact on the environment. I am asking us to believe that it just might matter. It just might matter what we eat, what we plant, what we throw away. I know that every person in this room wants to be on the right side of history. We are going to make it very easy for you to know how to do that. A couple of examples. Today, there is a worldwide indigenous-led call to boycott beef in light of the massive Amazon deforestation, 80% of which is directly tied to ranchers in the beef industry. I know that nobody wants to sit here and listen to your vegetarian/vegan-ish rabbi tell you this. But we are going to answer that call by challenging our community, those who are medically able, to boycott beef and ideally to eat a plant-based diet for 1 month. For 1 month this year. And who knows, you might actually enjoy it, in which case you can join David and me online at Monty's for an Impossible Burger anytime. Number 2, we will cut out single-use plastics. Levi and I tried this for a week last month. It's not easy. But by logging our failures, we realized how much of our use can be attributed to convenience instead of to real need. And we are already making changes in our home and in our routines. For 1 month, I am asking you not only to bring reusable water bottles everywhere you go, but even to bring Tupperware for leftovers when you go out to dinner like Lisa Friedman does. Number 3, studies show that food waste is at a record high and accounts for significant amounts of harmful emissions. Food waste. For a month, we will buy what we need. We will put on our plates only what we will eat. We will practice restraint. Does some of this sound nutty to you? Sound a little bit excessive? These are no longer times that can sustain old norms. If individual behaviors like these are adopted at scale, they could reduce about 1/3 of the projected cumulative emissions over the course of the next 30 years. Voting, planting, cutting back, skipping meat, carpooling, these things alone are not going to save the planet, but they will remind us that we are not powerless. And they will allow us to develop new social norms which can spark collective action. When Beth Edelstein brings her reusable bamboo utensils to shul every week, it inspires me to carry around my own. The first time someone brought a cloth bag to a supermarket, people probably stared. But that culture shift paved the way for plastic bags to be banned in Los Angeles and statewide. And behavioral scientists are now making a compelling argument that every individual's choices, especially when amplified through social influence, help create a social environment that is ripe for the political change that we know we need. I know that our aspirations are high on the High Holy Days. That's why we put pledge cards in your hand today. Because we know it's when you feel like you're leading with your best selves. But as the year progresses, when you feel tired and you start to despair that none of this will make a damn bit of difference anyway, I beg you to remember that real people are already suffering from this ecological disaster, a human tragedy of our own making. I hope that you'll remember the tens of thousands of residents of Paradise, California, who all tried to evacuate on the same one road at the same moment as they were overwhelmed by massive wildfires tearing toward them. I ask you to remember the teachers who crowded kids into their cars to try to escape from school and faced bumper-to-bumper traffic as the fire consumed trees and homes beside the road and overcame their cars. I ask you to remember the story of one little boy stuck in a stifling car packed with students surrounded by flames who asked his teacher for permission to pray and then in a small voice asked God for help. They drove for 2 hours to get through the flames and the smoke and the flying, burning debris. That boy made it out safely that day, but 86 other people did not. We are not talking in abstraction when we talk about the climate. People are dying, and the cost of inaction is simply too high. In a midrash written nearly 1,000 years before the Industrial Revolution, the rabbis taught that God led Adam around all the trees in the Garden of Eden. And God said to Adam, "Look at my works. See how magnificent and how wonderful they are. Know this, every single thing that I created for you. But be mindful that you not spoil and destroy my world. For if you spoil it, ein mi sheyitaken acharecha, there will be no one after you to repair it." There is no one after us to repair it. We must do now what those oil execs and presidents and senators failed to do back in the 80s. We need to give a damn about the human and the ecological toll of this disaster. We need to affirm that we are all tied together in a single garment of destiny, that climate refugees paying the price for our addiction to fossil fuels are already at our border, that we sink or swim together, that while the poor will be the first and the hardest hit, none of us and none of our children will be sheltered from the torrent of punishment being visited upon the earth. I am a scientist, writes Kate Marvel, so I believe in miracles. I live on one. What we need above all, she argues, is courage. Let us find the courage to treat our planet like the miracle it is. It matters how we respond to this crisis. It matters how we vote, and it matters who we vote for. It matters how we eat and what we eat. It matters how we shop, and it matters what we buy. Even while we cannot do everything, there is simply no scientific or moral calculation that justifies us doing nothing. Davar zeh talui banu. The matter depends on us. Shana tova.
Shana tova.